I want to start with everyone's hero, everyone in the political online left's personal hero or North Star, Cenk Uygur. You know, when we need to know what's going on in leftist thought or democratic political, actually, I shouldn't say democratic political, because Cenk is very anti-democratic party, if you listen to him, despite shilling for them nonstop. But this is a very, very interesting interview, and I have to give Glenn Greenwald credit for bringing on Michael Tracey to kind of fill in while he's on vacation, because Michael Tracey is one of those reporters who sometimes I hate that guy because he just is so against the grain. He's saying stuff that I don't want to hear. And I kind of like that too, because it's like, you know what? He's right. He's right. At the end of the day, Michael Tracey is one of the more honest journalists out there. I can tell by the way he operates, he doesn't have a partisan bias. He's very hard on both sides of the coin, which is how you should be. And anyway, this is a very interesting interview in general. If you haven't seen it, I of course recommend you go watch the whole thing. But let's get it started. Here's Cenk talking to Michael Tracey about the Democratic primary.
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So Cenk, you, as we said, you ran for president. Obviously, you never maintained that you stood a particularly good chance of winning the nomination. That wasn't really the point. The point was you wanted to force the issue and get Democrats to realize that if they pressed ahead with Joe Biden, they were going to be in for a nightmare, that Donald Trump could romp, that Joe Biden didn't have the capacity to run a vigorous campaign. And I want to just pull up a primary ballot. Your name was on one of these ballots along with Dean.
You know, it's funny because Joe Biden didn't have the capacity to run a vigorous campaign in 2020 either, but Cenk and all these people supported him anyway.
Phillips, Marianne Williamson, and of course, Joe Biden. But conspicuously missing from that list of candidates was Kamala Harris. So one of the points that I've been making is that Kamala Harris is being ushered to the nomination through a process that has remarkably little actual small d Democratic input from voters. She hasn't had to win a single vote, a single primary. She got a grand total of 0 delegates in 2020 and 0 in 2024, at least if you go by state and territory primary election outcomes.
Very, very good point, Michael. Let's see how Cenk responds.
So I thought we were going to get this open convention process where they could have a mini primary or something truncated to actually gauge the will of the electorate. And in fact, Joe Biden was denouncing these insider maneuvers against him.
If there's one thing we know, it's that the Democratic Party cares about the will of the electorate. We've definitely seen that in their actions for years. The way they treated Bernie Sanders being probably the most prominent example of that.
Just in the past couple of weeks, he said that they would thwart the will of the primary voters. And we're now even told that the DNC is going to have a virtual nomination still, a virtual roll call before the convention, basically negating the whole purpose of the convention, which they were going to do with Biden. Now they're going to keep doing with Kamala, so that nobody can even contest it apparently on the floor, or the whole purpose of a convention has now been overturned. So what do you make of it? I mean, does this satisfy your criticisms of how the primary process was conducted now that Kamala is just having the red carpet rolled out for her?
Now listen to the mental gymnastics that Mr. Uygur does right here. This is fantastic.
Well, let's start with a fun fact. I received more votes for president than Kamala Harris has.
That is a fun fact. That is a very fun fact.
That is a very fun fact.
I received more votes for president than Kamala Harris has.
That is a fun fact. That is a very fun fact.
Yeah. And not only am I just an online talk show host, but I'm a naturalized citizen. So that's why I was only on 7 ballots. That's a civil rights issue somebody should get back to someday. But that was, of course, not the primary reason that I ran. I ran, as I stated from the beginning, in an almost.
Did Cenk just say he works for Iran?
Almost every interview
Sorry, that was a stupid joke, but that is the level of insanity that these neocons, the new democratic neocons, have.
That I did. It was an act of desperation because I felt like we were all on board the Titanic and we all saw the iceberg, or at least a lot of us saw the iceberg, apparently. And I was actually surprised later in the process to find out that Blue MAGA existed and that they actually they didn't see the iceberg at all until the debate.
That's a blatant lie right there. He was surprised to find out that Blue MAGA actually exists. Blue MAGAs vote blue no matter who. I'm sure you could find, I didn't go look, but I'm sure you can find hours of tape about Cenk, because he paints himself as this leftist insurgent within the Democratic Party. So I'm sure you can find hours of tape of him talking about how vote blue no matter who is terrible and da 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 da.
But I saw it. I know a bunch of people saw it, and I thought, well, it doesn't look like anybody's going to do anything about it. So I'm just going to lunge into the captain's quarters and try to move the wheel, because otherwise we're toast, and Donald Trump's going to win, and God knows what happens to democracy, et cetera, et cetera.
And God knows what happens to democracy, et cetera, et cetera. Our whole process in the Democratic primary and the Democratic Party is completely undemocratic, but we have to vote for that to save democracy. That is the crux of his argument throughout this. Listen.
But you know what? All the folks who decided to try to make a difference, whether it was and it is strange bedfellows. I don't know anyone who criticizes Nancy Pelosi more than I do. And so
I don't know anyone who criticizes Nancy Pelosi more than I do. Wow. Stunning lack of self-awareness.
So me and Nancy Pelosi on the same side, that is weird. And
there's that word weird. JD Vance is weird. Cenk working with Nancy Pelosi is weird. No, it's not. How these people through their NLP tactics or these hypnosis, repetition things they do, they just delegitimize the meaning of words.
Ezra Klein and James Carville and David Axelrod. And by the way, let's also note Axelrod, top advisor to Barack Obama, James Carville, top advisor to the Clintons, and no one got the memo. I'm like, it's the Obamas and the Clintons are telling you there's something wrong with Joe Biden, and you knuckleheads aren't getting it.
So Cenk right here is tacitly admitting, hey, I'm with the establishment. The Obamas and the Clintons. I'm with the Democratic establishment on this. I think the thing that's so hilarious about Cenk and the Young Turks is that they literally make arguments against themselves all day long. And anyone with a functional brain who isn't just a partisan robot can see through people who are intellectually disingenuous like this, who, are obvious shills.
Right. So there's the old fights, Michael, between progressives versus the establishment. And in this particular election, since I'm one of the few Democrats who actually think that democracy is on the line, it led to a completely different.
I'm one of the few Democrats who think that democracy actually is on the line. And that's why you need to vote for a donor-appointed, completely undemocratically elected candidate to save democracy. That is their argument. Do they not see how ridiculous this looks? Apparently not.
Coalitions, people who were perfectly happy to lose to Donald Trump and people who really, really didn't want to lose to Donald Trump. So me, Carville, et cetera, were the ones who didn't want to lose to Donald Trump. Blue MAGA was like, who cares? As long as we...
Now, for me, being the conspiracy theorist / critical thinker that I am, this kind of Cenk telling you how he aligns with the establishment is a good way for them to kind of try to corral the left psychologically and go, hey, Biden sucks and we know it, but we're going to throw in, Kamala Harris, who is a woman of color, which, let's be honest, as far as electoral politics go, if Kamala, it's going to be Trump or Kamala. And either way, I really don't care who wins at this point because Trump has just face planted completely. It's almost like he's trying to lose just playing the old racist Republican hits to the base instead of trying to, bring in new people. And a Kamala presidency would, as fake and contrived and orchestrated as it is, would make women feel good. So, there is that aspect of it. But anyway, let's keep listening to the brilliant mind of Cenk Uygur.
Obey Democratic leadership. That's what Morning Joe taught me. Oh, I have to bow my head. The top value of the Democratic Party is obedience, right? And I'm like, man, you guys have lost the thread. You completely forgot what the Democratic Party was supposed to be at. So
I love this. Well, I'm so for democracy that I want you to vote for these people who I will tell you with my own mouth, just flat out subverted democracy and propped someone up again.
Am I satisfied with the result? Well, I'm enormously satisfied that Joe Biden's out of the race, because we went from about a 0% chance of winning to about a 50% chance of winning. So hard to not be satisfied with that. Now, when you talk about, okay, but what about the process of democracy?
So again, there's Cenk again admitting that he is one of the establishment hacks. He is a party guy. Now listen to him pretend to be against it.
Was that fulfilled here? Oh, of course not. But look, democracy has a number of issues in current day American politics. And then I'm going to get to, yes, but what's the best we can do, right? So number one, come on, the donors control everything. We don't have a real democracy anyway, right? And I talked about this in my book, Justice is Coming. Princeton and Northwestern did a 20-year
quick little book plug there.
Study 1,800 policy issues. The bottom 90% of Americans have zero effect on public policy. Absolutely zero. Okay. The top 10.
And that's why you need to vote for the Democrats to save democracy right now. Trump is such a threat.
What's the weather like on your planet?
Jesus Christ.
Percent. They don't control everything, but when they want something, they get it 45% of the time. So already it's hilarious and ridiculous. I mean, Reid Hoffman today gave $7 million to Kamala Harris and demanded that Lena Khan will be fired. And guess what? She'll be fired.
Oh, I hear you. It's definitely a tiger by the tail.
Bought all of Congress, Netanyahu, a notorious war criminal, one of the most evil men of my lifetime, getting standing ovation after standing ovation. So what democracy?
But hurry and vote for those guys is his argument. Richie Torres is the worst person, but we have to vote for people like him to save democracy.
And so, but secondly, when you get into the primaries, the Democratic primaries are a joke and have been for a long time. So they, under the bullshit rubric of unity, notice they never have unity around progressives. There's never any unity other than corporate Democratic leadership. So this was a sham primary.
Who he just told you he's united with now. I'm with Pelosi and Carville and the Clintons and the Obamas.
Mary, again, I know because I was in it. In Florida, they just canceled the election. North Carolina, Tennessee, they didn't just take me off. A lot of states took me off because of the naturalized citizen issue. That's a totally different thing. But they took Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson off of the balance in North Carolina, Tennessee. It's a joke of a primary. And I kept saying the whole time, and mainstream media just didn't pay any attention because running against Joe Biden was a violation of etiquette. And so I was the bad guy. I was the radical for wanting democracy.
This radical for wanting democracy wants you to vote for the Democrats who just donor approved and handpicked donor their own goddamn candidate for president. And you have zero say in who that is, but you're going to happily vote for that.
I would say, democracy. If you're going to try to defend democracy in a general election, wouldn't it be nice if you had one in the primaries? And people.
Yeah. And this is the kind of mental gymnastics these people can do too. He's like, I know that the Democrats didn't have any democracy whatsoever in their primary, but we have to vote for them in the general to save democracy, guys. I got into an argument on Twitter with a woman the other day who was arguing about how she blocked me, of course, because she didn't have any valid arguments to make. She just started calling me names and blocked me. But she was trying to argue that Kamala Harris was better for Israel than Trump. And I said, that's a fucking ridiculous premise because she's the person enabling what they're doing right now. So you got to vote for her because she's going to stop it. Yo, she's in power right now. And at the very least, Trump as president will turn those brunch liberals against the government. So as a left-leaning person, if you're smart and you think strategically, giving the Democrats an L and showing them that the left actually has voting, power is one aspect of, the Democrats losing this year that would be a plus. And the second plus would be that all these dumb fuck brunch liberals who are like, yay, girl boss genocide. Oh, yeah, Kamala. Woo. Finally, a black woman will support the genocide. Yay, progress. All those people will suddenly be against everything the government does once Trump takes the reins. So just on those two strategic points alone, it would be better for the left to let the Democrats lose this election. And the idea that Trump is like going to end democracy and they'll never, they've been saying this since before he got elected, but let's keep going.
The mainstream media were like, how dare you bow your head to Joe Biden? He's the most young, dynamic guy that anybody's ever seen. But Michael, at this point, that ship has sailed. So then the next layer of it is, okay, I call for an open convention, as Ezra Klein did and others did. And that's obviously the last vestige we have of democracy at this point. And at this point,
and they're not even going to give you that, Cenk. They're not even going to give you that. And you're going to go, oh, but you still need to vote for them to save democracy. Why
don't you go back to your home on Whore Island?
Kamala Harris has gotten the majority of the pledged delegates. No one's even running against her. I mean, the Democratic Party just incredibly frustrating.
How do you hold these two points of view in the same brain at the same time? As someone who thinks critically and has like a functional brain and values, intellectual legitimacy, I can't do that. I can't go, oh, well, the Democrats might have subverted their every primary they've had for the last 20 years, but we still have to vote for them to save democracy. Save democracy. Save democracy by voting for the people who completely subvert their primary, who stomped Bernie Sanders twice, who literally propped up Hillary Clinton as the nominee and then lost to Trump. We need to vote for them to save democracy. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So in this next clip, Michael Tracey, God bless him, he goes hard in the paint. He pulls up this letter that Joe Biden wrote before they threw him out of the race. And this, I didn't even read this. So massive props to Tracey for pulling this up and confronting Cenk with it. But listen to this. This is fantastic.
I want to just quote to you, this was a letter that Joe Biden delivered to congressional Democrats on July 8th. This is the same day that he had his infamous Defiance Morning Joe call-in. Here's what he wrote in that letter. And maybe I'm unusual because I actually read the letter. And yes, I remember it. Michael. It was only a couple of weeks ago. I know everything we just throw down the memory hole at warp speed nowadays. But he says, the voters of the Democratic Party have voted. They have chosen me as the nominee of the party. Do we just now say that this process didn't matter, that the voters don't have a say? I decline to do that, he says.
I love that Joe Biden thinks it mattered in the first place. Like, remember what they did? They moved the first primary from Iowa to South Carolina just to rig the primary for Joe Biden, and then they pulled the cane out and just ripped him off the stage and propped up Kamala.
A deep obligation to the faith and the trust of the voters of the Democratic Party who have placed in me this year. It was their decision to make, not the press, not the pundits, not the big donors, not any selected group of individuals, no matter how well-intentioned. The voters and the voters alone decide the nominee of the Democratic Party. And this is the kicker, okay, Cenk? Biden says, how can we stand for democracy in our nation if we ignore it in our own party? I cannot.
Wow, Biden sounds like me.
Do that. I will not do that. So how are the Democrats with a straight face going to start screaming, as they have incessantly forever, and you apparently agree on the substance of this point. I might quibble a little bit. I think a lot of the rhetoric around democracy and Trump overturning it tends to be a bit histrionic and overblown, but that's like a more of a substantive conflict we may have. But in terms of the consistency of the Democrats' own messaging, Joe Biden himself is the one who said that it would be undermined if they allow this insider putsch to go forward. So are we just going to now memory hold this letter? Is Joe Biden really now going to be so cast by the wayside that everybody's supposed to forget Ezra Klein, Matthew Iglesias,
Yes, absolutely.
Thomas Friedman, the Washington Post, Vox, name your Democratic aligned pundit or media outlet? Are they all going to forget that, 2.5 weeks ago, Joe Biden said that if you go through with this ouster of me, it means that our own party, the Democratic Party, is thwarting democracy? I mean, to me, it just seems, I feel crazy.
So let's be honest about this too. Let's be just like completely bluntly honest about this. If you have the presidency, you're not going to have a primary. You're not like, I understand why the Democrats did that politically. It makes sense strategically. And I give them credit. I'll give them credit for that. The Republicans did the same thing when Trump was president. They didn't have a primary. They've got the White House. Why would they do that? So you do have to give them credit for that. But the problem here is that all these people knew very well how senile Joe Biden was and that he wasn't actually running anything. And I think if there's any silver lining to Joe Biden's presidency, it's the proof positive that the president himself or the person that they put in there is almost meaningless, and that these bureaucrats in the permanent Washington, permanent state, whatever you want to call it, I don't like to call it deep state now because everyone equates that with conspiracy bullshit. And the reality is there is a permanent Washington. People like Anthony Fauci are evidence of that. The guy's worked in the halls of power for 50 years. But the point, again, is that the Biden presidency kind of proves positive. Like Glenn brought this up recently. Who's running the country right now? They told us for weeks that Biden was senile. Kamala's out doing rallies now. And so who's actually running things? I think we kind of know that. Us who pay attention to indie media and who listen to the Max Blumenthals and the Aaron Mate, the Caitlin Johnstons and the Jimmy Dores and the, those kind of people, we're actually informed as to what's going on. We don't just watch state media. But let's listen to what Cenk's answer to this is.
Yeah, look, Joe Biden wrote that same letter for the same reason that he said, you know what? I demand to have a primary in Florida. I can't believe they canceled that election. And I demand that everybody be put back on the ballot in North Carolina and Tennessee during the primaries. And I demand that we do debates during the primaries so the candidates could be tested and that the voters get what they want. Oh, right. He didn't do any of that. No, he's monumentally full of crap. He loved that the primary was totally authoritarian, totally rigged to not only make sure that he was the candidate, but that he was protected and hidden in a basement.
So I will give Cenk that. That is a valid point he's making there. Like I said before, Joe Biden didn't have any problem with the primary until they decided to oust him. And it was a very unfair primary to begin with. But again, strategically, it makes sense that the Democrats would do that. I don't really fault them for that. As if you're trying to hold on to power you have, of course you have the White House. Why would you run a primary?
That he wouldn't have to actually run against any of us. I mean, look, they were hiding him from me, Marianne Williamson, and Dean Phillips.
They were hiding him in 2020, Cenk, when you supported him to save democracy.
They knew he was going to lose. If you can't beat us in an open debate or in an open and fair contest, of course you're going to get your ass handed to you, even by a moron like Donald Trump. That letter is garbage. It's trash. He never meant a word of it. So I don't really care about that letter just because I already know that Joe Biden's a hypocrite.
So that's his way of obviously dismissing that. But the points Biden made are valid despite, him obviously being the benefactor or the person who benefited from that primary. So I will give Tracey credit again. He kind of called Cenk out for the hypocrisy a little bit in this. So listen to this next clip.
Proceedings matter because the next step in that plot, again, written by Eastman, who is Trump's lawyer, is
so Cenk here is talking about why January 6th and the 2020 election were such a big deal.
Then you say, well, since we couldn't certify the election, we have no choice but to go back to the state legislatures and ask who are their electors that they want to send up. Now, at that point, that's when they had the fake electors that were ready to go.
But Jake,
they
this
knew
was
they
a
had lost.
harebrained scheme that Eastman cooked up in concert with other Trump operatives to try to invoke some, I think, unfounded constitutional strategy whereby they could delay the certification of the votes.
It's a scheme very similar to pretending the person who beat you in the election was a secret Russian spy sent by Putin to destroy America. Very similar harebrained tactic, if I might add.
And have the veracity of the election outcomes in individual states retabulated. And the idea was they would prove that some fraud took place, and therefore the legitimate electors would be awarded to Trump. I don't think that was a defensible strategy. All I'm saying is to conflate that with an attempt to overthrow the government or abolish democracy or...
Again, these people, the idea that they were about to overthrow the most powerful military in the world is patently ridiculous, but I'll let Cenk
carry out a coup. I mean, this is insane democratic hyperbole, and all the more ridiculous given what Biden just said is the undemocratic tendencies within the Democratic Party itself. I mean, you even had Democrats in individual states try to strike Trump from ballots by invoking this insurrection clause of the Constitution, and the Supreme Court unanimously said that was not legitimate. So I just think that, if you want to talk about democracy, I'm not saying you, but if Democrats or whomever wants to venerate the sanctity of democracy, well, you have points that are scored on each side in terms of democratic infringements, right? Including on the Democratic side and the Republican side. Doesn't mean that they're equal. And I agree that what Trump did after the 2020 election was discreditable, but it seems like there's this inveterate need for Democrats to just chronically exaggerate what that actually signified.
That was an intellectual bitch slap right there by Michael Tracey. Hats off to him for that. Hats off. But he also kind of at the end of it, softened it a little bit. He's like, I'm not saying you personally, but it's the point I've been making throughout this. How can you sit here and say Trump is a threat to democracy after what the Democrats have been visibly doing for the last 10 years? You have no credibility saying that.
The reality is there was never a chance. It was impossible that it ever would have actually overthrown the government.
No, you're totally wrong about that, Michael. So again, consistent.
He's totally wrong about that.
I thought the idea of taking Trump off because the Insurrection Act off the ballots was absurd. I spoke out against that. You want to say,
did he really? I didn't have time to go look for tape of that, but I'm willing to bet he did not defend Trump against the being pulled off the ballot in Colorado. Maybe he did. If he did, kudos to him for that. It's one of the rare instances of him being intellectually honest, but I don't think he did. I'm pretty sure I could dig up tape of him. Okay, let's try it.
I am curious what you think about this, Cenk.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm thrilled that people are beginning to read the 14th Amendment. Yes, you should read the whole thing. It's got amazing parts to it. So in this case, there's no question that the 14th Amendment says that if you participate in an insurrection, obviously meaning the Civil War, but beyond, it didn't just say the Civil War. They said any insurrection against America, you cannot hold office. And that makes sense. And it is what Trump did in insurrection. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so he just flat out lied. He was not consistent. He did say that this was cool, that they were going to take Trump off the ballot.
Fake electors ready to do a coup and install himself when he knew he had lost. That is an insurrection against America. So point one, the ruling is logical. You could disagree with it politically, but it is logical. They're just enforcing what the 14th Amendment actually says. So then you can say, hey, I want to argue on the facts. Was it really an insurrection? No problem. That's what courts are for. So far, the Colorado Supreme Court has ruled, yes, it was an insurrection. They could appeal, and they could, and eventually they'll almost certainly take this to the Supreme Court. So now there is one issue that I have with it, which is that if the different states start interpreting the 14th Amendment in different ways, the Supreme Court must resolve it, because we cannot have Colorado banning Trump and some other states banning some other candidates that are potentially on and not on the ballots, and have this hodgepodge all over the country of blue states and red states blocking different candidates. So I urge the Supreme Court to take this on, take any 14th Amendment case on, and clarify what the rules are. And
okay, well, maybe he did, maybe he was, we'll give him a little bit of credit there, because he did kind of clarify at the end that the Supreme Court should handle it, and they did. And I don't want to watch anything else he said, because I don't want to give the Young Turks views. But
Democrats are hypocrites and don't really believe what they mean. Of course, they're politicians, and politicians controlled by donors. That's not an issue for me.
But vote for them to save democracy.
But when you're excusing what Trump did and minimizing it,
I'm not
I think you're
excusing
factually
it. I'm not excusing it. I'm saying it hasn't been proportionately depicted.
Finish.
Yeah.
Let me finish.
Go ahead.
So the part that you didn't let me finish is that when they kick it back to the states and they bring in the fake electors, and Rudy Giuliani, I asked him.
I really dropped the ball not having a sound drop of Kanye going, I'm gonna let you finish, but Beyonce had the best video of all time.
Hey, Trump already had an alternate slate of electors, because each candidate does. Why don't you guys just use that instead of the fake electors? He said because half of them wouldn't do it. Because
so now he gets into semantics about stupid shit. You know, I mean, George Bush had a scheme to overthrow the election in 2000, and it was successful. The Democrats are just mad that their scheme to steal the election with Clinton by kind of like crowbarring her in as the nominee and then pretending Trump was a secret Russian spy didn't work. Okay, so this last clip is kind of just Tracey giving Cenk a little bit of props, but also they talk about RFK. And again, this is just Cenk revealing what a fraud he is. So they're talking about RFK here, and Cenk points out one of the better things RFK has here is his opposition to corporate hedge funds and private equity firms buying residential homes up.
Says he would prevent private equity from buying residential homes. Now, that is doable. They weren't buying residential homes just a couple of years ago. They're the ones that have driven up the housing market prices so that it's unaffordable for the average American. And they're the ones choking off wealth creation in this country, because we mainly create wealth through purchasing homes. And now the bankers.
They're also widely supporting Kamala Harris, which Cenk will also tell you to vote for.
Are going to buy all those homes and drive us out of the market. If he prevented that alone might be worth it. So I've got an open mind, and I'm not a robot from mainstream media. So I look at his upsides and his downsides as I do with Trump and Kamala Harris. And at the end, I'll make a decision on who I think is the best. But right now, his deal breakers are hugely problematic for me. So very likely I'll vote for the Democrat.
There you go. Democratic shill, Cenk Uygur. Now, Tracey gives him a little bit of props here.
All right, well, Cenk Uygur, we really appreciate you joining us. Like I said at the outset, I did in a previous life even work for the Young Turks briefly. And I appreciated it largely because you followed through on your pledge to me and gave me the autonomy to do what I wanted to do, notwithstanding any disagreements that you and I might have or I might have had with other people who were on the staff. And so I respect that you follow through on that promise, and I do think that it's an honorable thing, especially for somebody who runs a big media organization, who could micromanage things, who could impose his will on others. You were tolerant of disagreements. That's a laudable trait. And it's one that I even try to embody in my own dealings. I'm not running a media organization. I'm just filling in for Glenn Greenwald right now. But at least in spirit, it's something that I've definitely tried to replicate. So thank you for that. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
That's beautiful, man.
Cenk Uygur, the wildly disingenuous Democratic backed pundit who pretends to be against the Democratic Party and then tells you to vote for them. What a genius dude that guy is.